from an innovation perspective, and I was asked earlier today on a few occasions, well, innovation in construction, what does that really mean? So right off the bat, it's three things to our organization as we try to define that. Number one, it's about collaboration. You speak of the circular economy and fundamentally how we work together. We've, in construction design, that we've got to look at it differently. So collaboration, number one. Secondly, prefabrication. Other parts of the world, like Netherlands, like in China, they speak of modular construction. We're moving that way, but to us, prefabrication, absolutely. The third area is what we call building performance. And I'll speak on building performance because as we focus on it, the waste reduction or getting to zero waste is certainly a part of it. But to establish common language, if I may, building performance, really we're focusing on four areas. And recently I had a debate with somebody when we're striving to get to zero waste, and the economic discussion came into play. And in this particular roundtable, they said, don't enter into economics. I said, well, how could we not? We talk about the built environment, whether it's residential or commercial, institutional. We're dealing so often with pension funds, and pension funds, they'll look at 50, 70-year money, and economics will always play a role. So we've got to really look at it holistically. And when we do so, if we think of all the financial metrics, of course, that stands on its own. If we think about the health, the occupant, if you think your average white-collar worker in a building high-rise, and I'll talk a little bit about Bentall's 745 Thurlow as an example of a project we did in getting into waste diversion. But if you think of your average white-collar worker in a building, knowledge worker, is that at $300, $400 a square foot per year? How do we measure productivity? So when we talk about the built environment, we've got to look at the people side of it as well. Carbon, that's a big one, and that ties into everything. Of course, we're here today about getting to zero waste. And kudos to Mayor Brody and asking questions, how do we get to zero waste? Because it's been a real catalyst for me to think much deeper, and so I'm just so delighted to be here and learn with you guys today. But when we get into the whole waste reduction aspect, there's many ways that we're looking at it, but it starts on upstream. It starts with the materials we use. How do we look at modular materials, whether it's raised flooring, modular walls, whatever the case may be? How do we extend the life cycle of that equipment? I read in a guide here earlier today that it's about 30% of our landfill is construction, demolition, building related. In some cities, I hear that's north of 40%. Whatever the case, it's significant. So we've got to address that. So how we look at it when we speak of circular economy within the construction space, here's really how we look at it. And I must tell you, as I get into this, when we address building performance, we address the waste, the occupant productivity, the health, well-being, whatever it is, what we see as a fundamental challenge in our industry is how do we bring the finance, and even marketing, by the way, but finance, the design, the construction, and the operations. And in our industry today, so often the challenge, whether you're in private or public sector, is how do we knock those silos down? How do we bring all stakeholders together? And often in our industry, we speak about the integrated design process, and that's happening more and more, but as an industry, I would subscribe to the fact we need to do a lot better. So when we look at circular economy, and I'll use one project, it was Bentall's 745 Thurlow here in Vancouver. It's a multi-tenant building. I forget how many floors now, I won't say, but nonetheless, when we looked at it, as we started in our early planning, we went upstream. We went up to our supply chain, and we started to look at ways, and this is lessons learned for us. How do we reduce the packaging, the material, even ever before it gets to on-site? And that was a real opportunity, and with our whole supply chain, in fact, we're getting better, but we're challenging on it, right? And that made sense when we get to even coming on-site, because challenges like traffic management, when we get into the whole waste diversion, never mind even feeding the job, we've got to address that into our equations when we're reporting on how we're reducing waste, because carbon and traffic, it all plays into it. The other thing on site diversion, source separation, so we started documenting our processes as an organization. But what we learned, some of the people on site, to me, I thought this is pretty basic. But on site, sometimes we weren't diverting or separating the waste. So a little lesson learned for us. We've really got to measure it and have a real strict process, but on-site training with the people on the site, as we go through it. The next one, when you're getting into pickup removal, and on this project, I think we had 19 different areas where the waste was diverted to. We had a number of different kinds of bins. So one of the things as we were planning, what we realized in the planning process was, again, traffic management. And And this costs money, it costs time when you're blocking traffic on the city streets. I mean, these are real life issues. So yes, we're striving to get to zero waste, but these are other issues that we had to take into our account in our planning. And as we do lessons learned and go forward, we have to address it. I've got a question around waste tipping fees, because as we get into this more and more, I don't know if this ties to, with the vendors, how do you call it? And I wrote it down, extended producer responsibility. And I'm not clear on this, and I throw this out as a question for maybe a bit later if others have answers. But the waste tipping fees, because economics will always play a role. If it's so low of a price, are people really sensitive to getting to reduce or even to near zero waste? If it's too high, it becomes maybe punitive. And so we in industry are discussing this now. And how do we stay outside of any regulatory framework? But again, the tipping fees, there's two sides to that debate, and it becomes quite a passionate debate at times. So I throw that out because I'm interested to hear other perspectives. And then again, as we go through the transfer station, as we started taking our 19 different sources and all the different, the bins and so forth, we go through the transfer station and start processing. Data integrity, of course, comes into a role. So as a public organization, for us to report on a sustainability scorecard, how much waste have we actually reduced and so forth, we've got to be extremely sensitive to that on how we're reporting. Here's another example of a challenge. Even if some of the building organizations have governance, they've got a policy around getting to zero waste, what we're finding is the procedural aspect. Many organizations don't have standard operating procedures. So in the construction side, we're finding we have to address that. But again, I table this as challenges, but opportunities on how we're going to get better. And the other aspect is the social, the behavioral. What we're learning is that's a significant opportunity to address. From an energy management side, we're finding that we can further reduce consumption by north of 10% by how we bring awareness around the human behavior. And so now we're starting to study that on how, with the waste initiative, we address behavior in a workplace. So these are some things that we as an organization are focusing on. And then really in the last component here, strategic change. Bringing all these stakeholders together at a municipal or even in large real estate development to really achieve this, we're finding we have to bring all these players together that so often have never worked together. And so what we're learning, and in fact one of the areas I'm studying, is strategic change. How do you bring stakeholders together, create a sense of urgency, and get alignment around common vision and common values? And I can tell you from a sustainability office versus a procurement office as an example, often they speak different languages. And how do you bring that together throughout the life cycle of a building? Again, when you think of pension funds, 50, 70-year money. So these are some of the things we as an organization are focusing on. And again, I'm grateful to be here, so thank you.